You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we are going to turn our attention to team leadership. I mean, in the simplest form, most everyone that has been given a position of authority and management or leadership has some form of a team. You've got some direct reports or a small group, maybe bigger group, but understanding and being better about team dynamics is always a challenge, and my guest today is going to help us understand that a little better. Her name is Regina Huber. Regina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Doug, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Regina has spun up for me my old days of taking high school German. She is a German by birth, but she is a world traveler and a self-professed nomad, and I'll let her tell a little more about that. And on that point, Regina, tell us a little bit about your background before we get into the meat of the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in Germany. I moved to Spain at 26. I grew up as the shyest kid in town, but I was always extremely curious, and that's probably what allowed me to live all these adventures on several different continents. From Spain, I later moved to Brazil. I lived in Brazil twice, actually, in Argentina twice, on the West Coast, on the East Coast of the US. I've spent quite some time lately on the African continent as well. And I'm currently in Europe, but back and forth between the US and Europe. And yes, I was thrown into a leadership position at the age of 27 in Spain. And from there, I have had very eclectic experiences as a leader, also as a business owner, eventually in Brazil and in Argentina. And this is me in a nutshell. In 2012, I moved to New York City from Rio de Janeiro, two marvelous cities. And I started building my current business, Transform Your Performance. I really, at the time, was challenged to bring all this eclectic experience together into something new and meaningful, a new chapter of my life. I had just gone through an extremely painful experience with a fraudulent business partner in Brazil. And despite these setbacks, I wanted to create something new and exciting that also, of course, would have meaning to other people, because it shouldn't just be exciting for myself. And that was a challenge at the time, but I figured it out. And this is how Transform Your Performance was born. It's a transformational leadership and career coaching service, as well as I do also trainings, speaking, and I have authored a book, co-authored some other books, and am writing a second book of my own right now.
That's
I
great.
recently also created a podcast, by the way. I just launched that.
Nice.
It's called Rise to Lead. And I've published the first few episodes. So I'm very, very happy about that.
Well, congratulations on that. It's, getting started in it is always one of the biggest challenges, but I'm looking forward to hopping over there and taking a read. Somewhere in the run-up for this, I didn't realize you had a show, but I will certainly check that out. In the business form that you have now, again, as we were kind of prepping, you shared with me you have created a number of different frameworks, and they all sound amazing, and we don't have enough time today to touch on all of them, but the one I picked from your repertoire was one about the team dynamic, team leadership. So give us an overview of what that framework, what's it called, and what does it contain?
Yes, thank you for letting me do that. It is called the New Paradigm Leadership Framework, NPL framework, and it helps us to build happier and more engaged teams. We want both, right? We want them to be more engaged. We want them to be happier. And with your permission, I'd love to introduce the main concepts. It includes 4 main elements. And I believe these elements are crucial and actually today more than ever. The four elements are first mind. Your mindset, of course, impacts all you do. It determines your vision, how big your vision can get. It also determines your team vision, because what you live as a leader of a team is automatically somehow also conveyed to your team, right? And it of course, yes, we also need a vision as a team. That's ideal, that we also have a team vision, but it's all also we constantly exchange information by how we show up as leaders, of course. And your mindset determines the level of drive, of enthusiasm, and of persistence or lack thereof that you can show as a leader, and that your team will pick up as well. And I believe that once you shift your own mind and master what I call a self-empowering mindset, it will be easier to shift the collective mindset of your team as well. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece is message. That, of course, stands for anything communication. And it's about all the different ways in which we communicate. So it's not just about words. Yes, words matter. They are very important, but we also communicate in so many other ways. We have our body language, our posture. You know, whether we speak or not, messages are always conveyed. We can also send a message through silence. We also, and this is oftentimes neglected, or just not a lot of people think of this, we transmit messages through our energy. And in fact, our energy flows into everything we think, we say, and we do. So I often wonder why we don't talk more about energy in business, actually. It's not so much even about the level of energy as it is about the quality of energy. And yes, as I said before, yes, of course, words do matter. I also use conversational intelligence in my work. That's a specific methodology I studied. And as leaders, we need to get our message across. And that requires effective communication skills. And again, this implies or involves a lot of different elements. So this is why this is so important to really look into in detail. The third element is trust. Trust is the glue that bonds our teams together. It allows creativity to flow. Without trust, we will not be able to encourage and inspire our team members to bring their best selves and their million-dollar ideas potentially, right? So when people feel safe and comfortable enough to share, that's when they will contribute their best ideas. And that, of course, then drives innovation. And of course, trust building is also key in our interaction with all the stakeholders, whether it's our customers, clients, whether it's our business partners, maybe shareholders, whoever it is, right?
Right.
And then the fourth element is the heart. I also talk a lot about heart set, not just mindset, but the heart in this context actually has multiple meanings in my understanding. It stands for the people of an organization, because the people are really the heart of the organization, and they deserve to be treated as such. Without the people, there's nothing left, right? And it also stands, as I said already, for heart set. Because we humans, we connect with each other through our hearts, through that very strong electromagnetic field of our hearts, which is much stronger, by the way, than the electromagnetic field of our head brains. And I consider the heart a part of the brain, as a lot of neuroscience do as well, nowadays at least. So I think what's also important, what we need more of, is courageous leadership, bold leadership, people who are willing to stand up for what's right, to even when it requires swimming against the stream, or when sometimes it's about innovation. When you introduce a new concept, it's not always welcomed right away by everybody. And it requires courage to introduce a new concept, a new product, a new whatever. So our heart is where we find that courage. Fear is in our minds. Courage is in our hearts. Of course, fear is in our minds when we don't practice the self-empowering mindset. We all have fears, of course, but sometimes it requires us to step up anyway. Mm-hmm. And courage is not the absence of fears, it's doing it anyway. And I believe that also compassion, love, and really the love for our work and for the people we work with is also important in business, right? And that's why the heart is there.
Well, you covered a lot of ground here, and I'd like to kind of go back and unpack a few of the elements. And you've mentioned a couple of my favorites on my short list of center-focused encouragement that I give my clients. The first one is the mindset. Mm-hmm. I think it's terribly undervalued and underestimated, the significance of being in the right frame of mind to go do what it is you want to do, whether it's delivery on a work product or just engaging with your team, being in that right frame of mind. And it is incumbent on leaders to be able to show up in the moment with your best game. And I know that's a huge burden. And there are people out there that say, but I'm not always at my best. And that's true. And that's another discussion to be had. The question then is, if you're really not genuinely at your best, what can you do about it? But it's being mindful and self-aware of that break in what you would prefer to be, the leader you want to be versus the leader you're feeling like you are right in the moment. And how to become kind of transparent about that, be honest, be truthful, and all of that, in my humble opinion, helps accrue to the trust you can build in your team. Because you mentioned the element of trust, and I've got a book that I wrote on the topic of trust at work, and it is such a critical factor, because to get to innovation and creativity and even high productivity, studies have been done that say teams that don't have trust, or what many call the psychological safety element, they don't share with each other, they don't open up, they don't bring their best selves to the game because they're fearful, back to your heart and fear word, they're fearful they're going to be ridiculed or not accepted for their idea.
Yes, absolutely. And as you already hinted right now, fear and trust are mutually exclusive. They cannot exist in our brains at the same time. And it's really important to understand how trust works and which parts of our brains are activated when we are in fear mode versus in trust mode. Right. So we have this expression of the amygdala hijack. Usually what's supposed to be in charge is the prefrontal cortex. And the problem, though, is because the prefrontal cortex, we also sometimes call that the executive brain, in fact. And the problem, though, is that a lot of what happens is subconscious. We often go into fear mode without even knowing why, because it's just our safety or our survival mechanism. And that's when the amygdala can bypass the prefrontal cortex. And I know it's much more complex than this, just to simplify a little bit. And we go into this amygdala hijack, into this fight, flight, or freeze or mode. And we really don't know why we are in fear mode, but something small can trigger that. So as leaders, we need to really understand how this all works. Be aware, as you said, aware. I think what really helps leaders to avoid this to happen is when they are transparent consistently, when they come across as authentic, and energy again has a big role in this, because we often say that it takes 7 seconds for our 7 seconds to make a first impression. But the reality is it takes only 0.07 seconds for our brains to figure out whether we can trust someone. And that's about our energy. So if we show up with the right energy, then we already have made big strides. We don't always talk about this or pay attention to it. And I think it's worth doing that. And of course, as you know, trust is built in so many ways. It is built through words, through energy, through how you show up, even through your appearance. It's all a part of it. It's all a part of what we call presence, executive presence, leadership presence, business presence. And I believe it's really worth paying attention to how do we show up and practice self-observance or self-observation, and also ask for feedback, because our perception of self is not necessarily aligned with the perception of others.
Right.
And we can sometimes come across as completely different than what we think.
Right. Well, I agree with you. And as we talk about frequently, I'm a Hogan certified assessment administrator for leadership profiles and personalities. And one of the underlying principles in the Hogan world is the idea that we carry our own and create our own self-identity, but our reputation is that outward perception that all others have about us. And reputation and identity are sometimes at conflict. They don't align, they don't match up. And leaders who haven't taken a moment to think about that and intentionally study it, get feedback, and do the assessment of that alignment, fundamentally feel frustrated. They feel like, well, I know what I believe in and I know what I think I can do for this group, but they're not getting it. Where's the disconnect? And there's this kind of perpetual frustration that ensues. And if you turn your attention to that alignment and getting that feedback of, maybe it is a question of how you're showing up. You think you're showing up well, but others think not. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? And that's probably a whole show unto itself that we could get into. But so I also want to touch on and unpack a little bit. You mentioned communication. That too is one of my favorite topics. I use the phrase when we're thinking about our teams and leading others that a confused mind says no. And so as a leader, if you cannot be clear and concise and consistent with your message and the direction you're trying to lead the team, confused minds say no. And how that manifests, it's not about them doing wrong things, it's about them doing fundamentally nothing. Because a generally well-situated employee wants to do good work. And if you haven't given them clarity about what good work looks like or what a win can look like, they're going to do nothing because they don't want to do the wrong thing, but they don't know what is right. So they have no choice but to do fundamentally nothing. So it's a dynamic that I've observed, and for the record, as a leader and manager, I have changed my opinion on this. I pledge, or I admit guilt in my early career of not having that trust and having an attitude that maybe a lot of my people weren't there for the right reasons, and it was more of a war and conflict than it was a collaboration. And I've subsequently changed my mind about that, and in latter years have moved on to this principle that if you can hire good people, they're going to want to do good work.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the importance of clarity, right? It's really important to be clear in our communication so that people actually get, and clarifying that people have understood what we're trying to communicate, because there are a lot of communicational or conversational blind spots in communication. And some of them clearly come from emotions. Fear is a big one. We talked about that already. But also other types of emotions. Sometimes anger can limit us from getting someone's message because we have a preconditioned mind that's working there against this message landing, right? So, for example, also in conversational intelligence, we have what we call the conversational dashboard, and we try to figure out where each of our team members typically is on that dashboard. Of course, it will vary according to situations, according to maybe also the day of the week, but there is usually a way to figure out where they typically are right now. And then we, of course, want to bring them to a point where they go from skeptic or from not trusting at all toward greater trust and toward a mind of co-creation. I'm here to co-create with you. Okay. So this is really something that is worth thinking about. Where are my people on this dashboard, or whatever you want to use as a measurement?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I think sometimes you mentioned the personality types. Sometimes I see this all the time with my clients too. They say, oh, my boss doesn't get me, or he doesn't have patience, or she doesn't understand where I'm coming from. And oftentimes it's because they're completely different personality types. And as such, they have different communication styles. For example, if somebody is a very big picture person, and maybe their job requires them to be, their role demands this skill, then they will not have as much patience to listen to all the details. And we need to consider this also as leaders in the other direction, right? Trust is a two-way street. It's not just going in one direction. We as leaders need to trust our team members enough to delegate, or to just trust that they get the job done and well, and then support them when they need help doing it. But also, we also need to build that trust from them. So I think when we are more aware that there are different personality types in a team, then we can play with those situations better.
Right. No, I agree. And I want to hang with the idea of the clarity. I was doing an interview. In fact, the episode right before this one, my guest, his name was Steve Rice. We were talking about a situation, and he had a very good example. He was invited as a coach consultant to sit in on an executive team leadership meeting. And the CEO was standing there unveiling this new strategic plan of where the company was going to go, and ultimately talking about a doubling of sales growth and blah, blah, blah. And the CEO, was obviously very motivated, very energized, very excited, very confident, and was laying all this out. And then there was a short pause, and the CEO actually turned to Steve and said, "Do you have anything for the team?" And Steve looked over at the sales executive and said, "What do you think about this plan?" And there was no real response. There was this respectful refusal to say anything, And so Steve penetrated a little more and said, "Well, first let me ask, are you motivated to engage with this plan?" And the person said, "Well, what I just heard is my job. I have a job already, and now it's going to double."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here thinking, how in the, what, am I going to be able to do all of that? And so it became quickly very personal for that individual, that these grand plans, this great, chart that showed all this amazing growth was going to land square on their shoulders to execute, and they're already maxed out at what they're
Yeah.
doing. So it's like, what did you just tell me? You just told me I am now going to be set up to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, well, when we involve people more in decision making, I think that's also really important to realize is that we get more automatic buy-in, right? So when I just present something that has not ever been, and it might not always be possible, okay, I totally get that. But as much as possible, can we involve people? Can we at least ask them? Can we get their input so that then we can not just include their concerns or their thoughts or their ideas in the decision-making process, but also probably get some brilliant ideas from them, right? That can prevent these situations. And maybe it wasn't even meant like this. Maybe it was meant in a different way, but it comes across as such. And it
Mhm.
was just not clearly communicated.
Right. I see that manifest a lot, certainly in my own corporate experience, but I also see it in smaller business where I've done a lot of work lately.
Mhm.
And classic example, but to me, it's a powerful picture of the risk that leaders have in asserting too much control over a situation. And specifically, the example I'm thinking of, as many of my listeners know, I've done a lot of work in the last year in the buy-sell arena, older baby boomer types wanting to sell off their businesses. And I'm working with the younger buyers, generationally younger, that are wanting to pay for and buy those already successful businesses. But when they take over, it's not uncommon that they're working with the team that's left behind and they're looking at something and asking a question. This thing over here doesn't seem quite right. What could we do differently? And the employee will say, "Oh, I've got an idea," and la la la, here's my idea. And the new owner will say, "Great, let's do that." And the other employee will say, the former owner never would let me do that. I asked, I tried, I suggested, and they didn't want to do that. And so there's this pin-up creativity, there's this pin-up productivity that often gets stifled when leaders aren't open to hear from the bottom up what the ideas may be.
Yeah, exactly. And they might actually miss out on that famous $1 million idea that I mentioned earlier, because we don't ask enough questions sometimes. And
Right,
maybe also not the right questions,
right.
right? Maybe it's worth asking more open-ended questions, more about what do you think, getting different perspectives, sometimes even using strategies such as what should we definitely not do to gain new ideas.
Right.
Sometimes we need to be a little bit creative with our questions to get to the most brilliant new ideas and to greater innovation.
Well, and you bring up a theme that is really the center of my book about trust, and that is that when we go back to the very basic elements of our own experience in meeting someone, and I use the example of dating to find your significant other, that process involves questions. You go on that first date, you're chatting, you're talking, and you go, well, where have you lived? What kind of travel have you done? What kind of music do you like? What kind of food do you like? What's your favorite color? All these basic little questions. Well, if kind of all the boxes get checked and you're intrigued and interested, then what happens? You go on a second date, right? And over time, the questions get a little more significant, a little deeper meaning. Maybe they become political, religious, personal values, all those deeper things that people can connect on or want to connect on. And again, if the boxes continue to get checked, you finally arrive at that point. Hey, this is somebody that I could really see living my life with. Well, guess what, leaders? Your employees have that same dynamic. They need to ask questions. And the framework I describe in my book, as you can kind of tell a little bit from that diagram, there's 6 segments of where the questions may land. And you, as a leader, need to open the environment so that those questions can get handled. And spoiler alert, you don't always have to say yes to every question, but you need to be transparent and honest as best you can about what the answer to that question may be. And yes, on the broad spectrum of possibilities, some of your employees may self-select and say, I don't have enough of my questions answered in a favorable way. I'm out. I'm going to go work somewhere else. Well, that's good to know. If you're a leader, that's very good to know. And you will have achieved that by allowing those questions to be opened up, answered, and handled in that very direct and honest way.
Yeah, exactly. I think the more we know about each other, the better. Of course, you're not expected to disclose all your intimate secrets at work. However, and that would be, going into the realm of invasive questions. That's not the type of questions we're talking about. We're talking about curious, inquisitive questions that favor the work environment and that favor innovation, creativity, that help people also feel comfortable and heard. Because I also want to ask not just about work content, I want to ask about what somebody's aspirations are. Why are they even here? What is their personal vision for their life? This type of questions. And also sometimes I think what's really something that people miss out a lot on is, what are your passions outside of work? Because a lot of times there are some precious gems in those passions that seemingly are unrelated, but that can actually become useful or valuable at some point.
Yeah. Speaking of that, personal aspirations, I know a business owner, and he's got a good-sized company. It's a home services company. He does a quarterly social for his team, and it's a big team. He's got about 45, almost 50 employees. But they had this get-together, and, it might be a cookout or something, but part of the agenda for that gathering, everybody updates a personal vision board. They do the cut and paste and put things on personal boards, and it's a graphic representation of their aspirations for the near term. And one of the stories he tells that really depicts the power of this, he had a new employee that came to this event for the first time and was introduced to the concept of a vision board, and kind of got like, I don't know what this is. This doesn't make any sense. So they told him, they said, well, if you could do something significant over the next 90 days, what would that be? What would be a big win for you personally? It doesn't have to be directly related to the work here. And the guy goes, he said, I want to be able to earn enough extra money to buy bicycles for my daughters. Mm-hmm. And the owner said, ka-ching, we can do that. And he, again, this person was fairly new. What he hadn't learned yet was this company has some amazing incentive programs for all of their employees. I mean, everybody gets to win at some level. And I mean, it can be weekly, monthly, quarterly. But there are things they can do for the good of the company and the good of the population they serve that will give them this bonus money or this discretionary money. And the guy got read in on that and went to work. And in like 3 weeks, he had all the money he needed to go buy those bicycles.
Amazing. And it doesn't just create the awareness of the people around you of what you want, like in this case, but it also changes your subconscious filters.
Right.
And now it's possible.
Right.
And even if that it's not as easy as in this case, it opens up possibilities.
Right. Well, you can do that aspirational check-in and that mapping to tie back to the big objective, the big goal, the big focal point that your team has. But good leaders can do the work and figure out how to bring all that together, and that's the challenge. Well, Regina, I guess we're up on time here. I just peeked at the clock, and as always, these go way too fast for me anyway. And thank you so much for sharing all of this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having a wonderful conversation with me. I hope this has been valuable for our listeners and inspiring to some. That's always a goal, right?
Well,
so I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. My website is Transform Your Performance, like the name of my company. So again, that's transformyourperformance.com. I have a LinkedIn Career Growth Strategies newsletter. My LinkedIn profile is Regina Huber, so you can follow me there. You can subscribe to the newsletter. I also write about leadership on this newsletter, not just career. And I have a YouTube channel, simply at Regina Huber. And of course, now, most importantly, my Rise to Lead podcast. Please listen in, take a listen. I've only so far published the first few episodes, but I've already recorded 10 more. I'm very excited about them. They're all
Very
different
good.
leadership
Very
types. It would be
good.
great to have you on at some point soon as well, if you're up for it.
I'd be
Awesome.
happy to reciprocate. Always a pleasure to do that.
That would be lovely. I look forward to that. And then if our readers would like a gift, then I have a gift. It's called Outstanding Leadership. It's actually called exactly the Outstanding Leadership of Self and Team Workbook. And they can download it at transformyourperformance.com/outstanding leadership. So that's the other thing.
Awesome.
But also use a free resource of the podcast, like this one, like mine, because there are always some golden nuggets everywhere.
Great. Well, as always, folks, we will have that information in the show notes. You can hop down, whether you're on your streaming service or over on YouTube. You can get those links and get those great resources and learn more about Regina's work. With that, we're going to wrap this up, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.